Those are better. Oh, God. I was resisting. So loud.
It's actually quite light.
That's what I like.
It is right.
No, me either. It's actually quite light.
Okay, Mike, can you see us?
I can see you, yes. I think I can just see the two of you though. But I heard more voices.
Kyle, the remote's over here.
Oh, there's the one. Okay.
I think it's this one. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I had no problem with it earlier.
Yes,
just get stuck.
it's a little finicky.
You have to be really close.
Yeah, dude.
Oh, thank you.
Good trigger. Okay, that should be everybody. Yep, recording's going like.
Yes. I had a conversation.
Okay, we'll kick it off then. So it's July 25th. This is the Municipality of Anchorage and GBOS quarterly meeting. Girdwood Board of Supervisors, its committees and subcommittees are subject to the Alaska Open Meetings Act as found in Alaska Statute 44.62.310 and Anchorage Municipal Code 1.25 public meetings. Girdwood Board of Supervisors operates under the Girdwood Public Meeting Standards of Conduct. We'll call to order at 4:06. We'll do a roll call of supervisors, and then if administration people can introduce themselves after that. So my name is Mike Edgington. I'm co-chair and land use supervisor, and Brianna
Sullivan, co-chair and Parks and Recreation Cemetery supervisor.
Thank you. And Jennifer.
Jennifer Wingard, I'm Roads and Utilities Supervisor.
Thank you, Amanda.
Amanda Sassy, Public Safety Supervisor.
Thank you, Guy.
Guy Wade, Fire Department.
Thank you. And could administration introduce themselves as well, please?
Sure, we'll start with Chief.
Doug Schrage, Anchorage Fire Chief.
Amy DeMasi, Municipal Manager.
Courtney Peterson, Director of Office of Management Budget.
Adam Tromley, Director of Community Development. Yeah, Bryce Banks, Deputy Chief of Staff, Mayor Bronson's office.
Okay,
Kyle.
thank you. Thanks, Kyle. Okay. Any disclosures from supervisors? Hearing none, we'll move on to gender approval.
This is
Entertain a motion
Brianna. I
to
move to approve the agenda.
Thank you. Can I hear a second?
Amanda Sassy, I'll second.
Thank you. Quick announcements. Public is encouraged to ask questions and provide comment. Please raise your hands and wait to be acknowledged. To help discussion stay productive, direct comments to the board rather than other members of the public. Keep your comments focused on the business under discussion and please be respectful of everyone's opinions. We'll dive straight into the agenda. Item number 1, Girdwood Public Safety Contract. Amanda. And there's some other information on the agenda.
Yes.
Take this, Amanda. Thank you.
So we have not had our July meeting was canceled due to it falling on the July 4th. So we haven't talked about this in a couple months now, as of next Monday, I believe, or Tuesday. But it reads, current contract expires December 31st, 2022. Review current status of the public safety contract. GVSA requests municipal manager and legal department assistance through contract revision and review before heading to the assembly for approval, and no later than by early December 2022. So I think we're waiting on revisions getting revisions back from Whittier, and we'll do some of our own like little revisions. People's positions have changed, but otherwise, yeah, looking for the municipality to review before it goes to the assembly. Kyle, did I miss anything? Sorry.
Just to get to the point here, the Whittier, we have a police contract for services for the service area through Whittier for police, and that expires at the end of this year. And so we are right now in the process of negotiating with them for extension of 3 years with them. And I think the board is most concerned about getting support through the legal and review process here to make sure that that contract is renewed before it expires on New Year's Eve of this year. So I think that's where the direction we're going, and the GBOS is asking for assistance with.
Mike, you're on mute if you're trying to.
Thank you, Amanda.
Yep.
Yeah, just a quick question, Kyle. Have we got any indication of costs yet?
Yeah, what I heard from Whittier this morning was they're looking at a 12% increase. That would be for the next 3 years, no CPI calculation for each year. So it would be a flat increase. Whereas right now the contract has a CPI increase each year. The last 2 years, the CPI has been negative, so we haven't had an increase. But this last year we did have an increase of about 7.5% associated with that. And they did give some background on why it's going stipulated insurance and goods like fuel and things like that are just getting more and more expensive than operating. So they would be looking at that over.
Okay, and we haven't got any indication of any other substantial modifications to our existing contract?
No, they're pretty happy with the way the contract is, and so far we haven't seen much major changes in there. It's the way it's been.
So just for historical context, the process of taking it through legal and purchasing was pretty slow last rounds. This should be pretty much the same contracts we have in place. So we just want to make sure it starts early enough so we don't get any delays, don't cause us problems at the end, because that has been an issue in the past.
Yeah, agreed. So go ahead, Amy.
Oh, thank you. This is Amy Dubosky.
Thank you.
When do you think that contract will get to the municipality?
We're hoping by the end of August, there's a solid copy and draft done. We've been delayed because the chief's been out on medical, but he's coming back off medical, so we hopefully will have a lot of the details all hammered out by the mid-August. So
That shouldn't be a problem then.
Okay. Excellent, thank you. Anything else, Amanda, to cover under public safety?
Nope, that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. No other questions or comments. We will move on to item number 2, fire department. Start with Guy, and there are 2 topics here. Can you take this, Guy?
Yeah, no, I don't know if Chief Shragia, if this was clear in the agenda, but we wanted to ask about the status of the contract renewal for fire department EMS and talk a bit about funding appearing as a line item in future budgets. So.
Yes, thank you for that question and the opportunity to talk about it. I think the 2 items are closely related. My understanding is that that there's been several months of effort put into building a contract that's agreeable to the Board of Supervisors and the municipality. And there's agreement on every item save one, and that is the specifying the future funding for the Girdwood Fire Department. My understanding is that the board has requested that we specify the contract amount and that it have built-in escalators from year to year. And that's not something that we're able to accommodate. And so that is the single issue that is, as best as I understand, is holding up the execution of that contract.
Okay. So you're saying that the recommendation from the GBOS is to have that with the a line item with escalators each year, and the assembly, it's not something they typically do, or the fire department does not typically do?
To my knowledge, nobody within the municipality does that. We are, our budgets our operating budgets are appropriated to us each year. And we simply can commit future assemblies or future administrations to budgets that are outside of this year. So what we can do is we can specify the annual contract amount in the contract, which is similar to what we do for many other types of contracts. But what we can't do is say this is what the contract will be with built-in cost of living or other escalators.
And so if the contract is written, you know, without escalators, then there's, it would it make it more, likely make it more difficult if there was a need for increases to put those in place.
I think that's a true statement. Every entity within a municipality, including the Anchorage Fire Department, we have to compete for a finite amount of money, and we're all competing for it. And so we each year have to make our case for an increase in budget. And that's just the way it works.
Well, I appreciate that explanation. I don't have any other questions at this time. I don't know if Chief Weston, is that?
Do you mind if I ask a clarifying question? Because I'm a little confused by that answer, because we were just literally talking about a contract which the municipality has with Whittier Police Department, which was exactly the situation that you're saying cannot be done. We had a multi-year contract with effectively a CPI escalation clause in that, and legal were fine with it. There is, of course, a statement in there that all future payments are subject to appropriation, which is, I think, standard in all municipal contracts. But the structure of having a defined payment in the future, an expectation of the payment in the future, was in that contract. So clearly the municipality can do that. I think what's unclear is why that's not an option for the fire department in this particular case, for the EMS area-wide funding.
I'm aware of that contract. I can't explain why it exists the way it does. I can imagine a circumstance where, say for example, the Girdwood Fire Department, the Anchorage Fire Department, and the Chugiak Fire Department, during any future budget season, Chugiak and Anchorage could potentially see a reduction in their contract, and the Girdwood Fire Department might see an increase under this plan. So I cannot answer your question about why the Whittier Police Department contract is the way it is. I just know that that's not something that I'm permitted to do.
Okay, I mean, sorry, please go ahead.
The OMB director has her hand up.
This is the Office of Management budget. The Whittier contract is not with the municipality of Anchorage. The Whittier contract is with the Girdwood service area. So that is based on the Girdwood taxing and the Girdwood option of how they want to set up their own contracts. That's not the municipality of Anchorage. And so I just want to clarify, like, those aren't apples to apples, because that is something that Girdwood has designated and how they want to initiate and tax themselves. And so that's, the Whittier contract is not a municipality of Anchorage contract. That is a Girdwood contract, and are responsible for those fundings, and the municipality area-wide funds are not responsible for that.
Okay, I agree with you about the funding. The contract is actually between the municipality of Anchorage and signed by the municipal manager. Obviously, GBSA isn't a separate legal entity. It's a funding source for the contract, but I agree the funding source is distinct. But it's still subject to appropriations by the Assembly.
Correct, yes. All funding is, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the answer to, I think that answers the Chief's question about if budgets go down in the future, then obviously that funding is not appropriated, so it is not available. But that's a distinct issue from having an expected amount in the future, which is effectively what the police contract says. So I'm not sure I'm any clearer why these have been dealt with differently. And I suspect there are probably other contracts which the Muni has, which also has an expected future payment in future years, but subject to appropriation.
Actually, I think the most comparable one would be the contract that the fire department has with the Chugiak Volunteer Fire Group, and they do not have a built-in escalator.
Okay. Chief Weston, you have your hand up.
Thank you. I do find it curious that we're talking about a fire service area and a police service area in the Girdwood service area, but they get treated completely different. But that aside, I think that as people keep comparing Chugiak and Girdwood, there's differences. And so I want to just refresh everyone on the differences. Girdwood Fire and Rescue has been in play for over 60 years. We were auxiliary department from when Girdwood was city of Girdwood way back when. And so we've always been a paid part-time department. What that means is we have payroll obligations. This used to be, when I first started, taken care of by the Anchorage Fire Department because we were Station 15 and our payroll was done by Anchorage Fire Department until we became nonprofit, which the Anchorage Fire Department had asked us to do, with the understanding that the payroll would still be paid through Anchorage through these quarterly payments. As you know, in the number of years that passed since '99, the amount stayed the same, which meant that the fire service area was subsidizing EMS in the area. The reason we are requesting some assurance on the contract is so that we don't get into a situation where the fire service area continues to augment area-wide EMS services. Now you will say, well, it does that everywhere, so you're no different, right? I've heard that before. Now, I want to talk a little bit to that. We are a little bit different because we see every day the effects of what a decade of having the fire service area pay for area-wide EMS in terms of us being behind significantly on a number of fire service area staffing needs to meet national safety standards and also our equipment. So we just want to make sure that we are, considering our call volume and our continued increase in call volume as the area becomes a big, huge tourist destination, that we have the ability to meet the needs of the visitors and residents of the Turnagain Arm area for area-wide EMS.
Thank you, Chief. Was there any question in there for anyone in the administration specifically?
No, I feel like it's more just educational narrative.
Okay, thank you. And obviously the other slight complexity is we are talking about two slightly different things when we talk about Girdwood Volunteer Fire Department. We're talking about both the fire services which are funded by the service area and EMS services which are funded by area wide. So
correct.
I know it's
correct.
not. Sometimes
correct.
we end up talking about one or other. Not always
correct.
clear.
But I would say, the police budget and fire budget are not that different. However, the police budget staffs 6 people. The fire department somehow has to get staffing for everybody out of our budget. So I think that, if as we believe, as we've been told, that our minimum safety standard and standard should be a minimum staffing of 6 on every call, it's challenging when we don't have a budget to accommodate that staffing. And when you have, it's challenging with that budget. So just know that budget is trying to accommodate a minimum safety standard of 6 personnel initial response to every call. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you. Although it's not on the agenda, there is one other item related to this. In previous years, there was a more wide-ranging discussion about the balance between EMS, the source for EMS funding and the source for fire service funding. Obviously, again, we have a particular difference in Girdwood. There's a difference in Chugiak, Eagle River. Most of Anchorage is, of course, under the Anchorage Fire Department service area. I wondered if, I know some work had been done previously by the fire department, some analysis, and I believe by OMB as well. I just wondered if that's a piece of work which can be revisited to perhaps sort out the funding at a sort of municipal level, because there is this misbalance between fire service money providing funding for EMS, I believe.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, so my understanding from work that was done in previous years is approximately, if you look across the whole of Anchorage, approximately 2/3 of the funding comes from fire service areas for fire service and EMS jointly, and 1/3 comes from area wide, approximately, very approximately.
Yes.
The costs are probably the other way around based on the analysis that was done a couple of years ago. So there are higher costs associated with EMS than there are associated with fire services. Yet the fire services are cross-subsidizing EMS across the whole of the municipality. That's because of the way that things split up and service areas are structured, it's an extreme imbalance in Girdwood. It's an imbalance everywhere. And there had been some work done by the fire department, I believe OMB in the past, about looking at whether that could be rebalanced. And I wondered if that was something the administration is able to revisit now.
I mean, I can't tell you that we will be able to do it in the next couple of months as we build these budgets, because that's a pretty large endeavor, but yes, it is something that we can look at, because we can't just arbitrarily shift costs from one direction to the other.
Yes.
We would have to look at, the full aspect of how all of the departments are built, what are the services they're providing, how does that correlate to the service areas that are getting charged compared to the services they're providing, so it's a pretty large endeavor. I think it's something that, we can look into and see what, I think that it's kind of a known thing of the difference in the call volume from EMS to the fire, and that's kind of what drives that conversation. So, I think it's something we can look into in the future.
Okay, thank you. Chief, is that a new hand?
Yep, that's a new hand. I just wanted to suggest if there's not a way to balance for the inequity, a way that the Anchorage service area could help, or the area-wide service area could help us, would be to help us obtain equipment that we have to fundraise for, that the other two fire service areas don't have to fundraise for. For example, water rescue equipment, we have to fundraise for all that. I just went through having to fundraise for all of the extrication equipment on the Seward Highway. So this is a very unusual situation, and I am frequently asked by taxpayers when I'm trying to fundraise from them why the municipality isn't assisting in providing those tools for outside of the fire service area, which is in the area-wide EMS area, why I'm fundraising for all this. So it would be lovely if the municipality could help us when you have area-wide bonds, to help us by having those items that are used outside of the fire service area but within the area-wide EMS area, to place those items on the bonds for area-wide EMS, so we don't have to spend all of our time fundraising for it. It's very unusual that I had to fundraise, over $300,000 this year for equipment that normally would be provided under an area-wide bond. Thank you.
May I weigh in, please?
Please go ahead, Chief.
Thank you. Yeah, so I just want to remind everybody that I think the municipality has demonstrated some good faith in that area. In fact, the rescue truck that is currently being constructed was such a bond proposition that went to the area-wide voters and was approved. And so I think that's an example. It's one example of how the municipality has shown some effort in that area to accommodate that. Each year we submit our general obligation bond propositions to the administration, and I think it's a policy decision of the mayor as to which are going to go forward. They don't all go forward. But that's the mechanism to accomplish that, is to submit a proposal, and I will transmit that to the administration for consideration, along with all of our propositions as well. And then finally, I'd just like to throw out the idea that in terms of balance, area-wide EMS versus fire service areas, Chief Weston is correct and has already acknowledged that the costs for EMS are outpacing the costs for firefighting, but the revenues are upside down from the respective areas. But that's, I would say that Girdwood is not unique in that way. It's the same in Anchorage, and it's the same as Chugach, despite all of our differences. I think that the distribution of area-wide funds each year is pretty much in line with the size of the tax base, and also to some degree the call volume for each of the areas. So I think there is an effort to try to make it as fair as possible, so that Girdwood isn't subsidizing Chugach or Anchorage and vice versa. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. It's just a brief comment, Chief Weston. We have a few other things to get through in the next half hour.
Yeah, no, I would agree with everything that Chief Schrage said. And again, the way to help us right now is to help us bond for those things. So, you know, I don't see a lot of other command staff having to go on calls, be the extra staffing, fundraise all this money, do all this. So I would love if the AFD could help us get those items. Chief Schrage could help us get those items on area-wide bonds, so we can take the burden off having to do so much fundraising. And I think it would be, well received with the voters. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd also like to acknowledge that, yes, Rescue 41 was a good example of where it worked well across the bonding, although I don't think the bonding covered equipment, it only covered the...
No, we submitted the Rescue 41 bond with the equipment on it. The municipality cut all the equipment off.
Right. Yeah, so it's mixed, but yes, I agree that it was successful for the vehicle, not successful for the equipment. I would like to move on though to the next item. So thank you everybody for the discussion of the fire department. The next item is HLB topics, which I will start, and then I think Mr. Tremblay will have much to say. So there are actually three distinct things here. The first one is, I know the annual work plan for HLB has been pending for quite a while, and I think it keeps on getting moved off. I just wondered if there's clear intention on schedule for getting the work plan through the HLB Advisory Commission and approved. And then similarly, at some point there, I believe there's due to be a briefing to the HLB Advisory Commission and probably action to HLB Advisory Commission for Holton Hills. And I just wondered if you had, if the administration could give us any updates on schedule for those.
The HLB advisory plan, I'm sorry, the HLB annual work plan probably will be postponed, and we'll just start on 23 with the staff that we had, and our new Emma, who's doing a great job, but her experience was limited, especially in public meetings, getting the work plan moving. We just felt it better to just wait until 23 to where she has the experience and the knowledge base to get that going. So that's our plan. I doubt anything's going to change. We're into July, and to try to get that done, submitted to the assembly wouldn't be probably till October, maybe even though at some point we'd have to wrap right around and get into 23.
Thank you, that makes sense.
Yep. As far as the HLBAC work session regarding Holton Hills, we don't have a work session. There is no, I don't believe there's any intention to necessarily have a work session, but we are doing a presentation at the July meeting here on the 28th, I believe, 28th. We're going to do, myself and CY Investments is going to do a presentation to the HLB Advisory Commission on where we stand with the project.
Okay, thank you. I believe at the last there was a suggestion of a work session on Holton Hills at the last advisory commission, but maybe it wasn't adopted. maybe where the confusion comes from. Thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
And then the third issue is, of course, the broader question about the HLB, about the Holton Hills project itself. And I think everyone is aware of that we have an advisory committee within GBOS of 7 members, which is going to sort of be the focus of that discussion. It can be a bit more agile than the GBOS itself can be. So I believe Mr. Tremblay is meeting with them next week, is it, on the 2nd? I believe that's the next scheduled meeting.
My schedule, but whenever that was set up.
Okay.
Yeah, I have to look at my schedule, but I will be there, and so will Connie at the next one.
Okay. Jennifer, please go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, I would like to add in regards to development agreements.
Yes.
You know, we have development agreements with Providence Hospital for some developments they have going off Eagle Street. Those development agreements are not negotiated publicly. They are a public document, and the Assembly, I believe, ultimately does approve them. So the negotiation of a development agreement isn't necessarily a public process, and that's not unique to just Holton Hills, but it's really every development agreement that I've been involved in. I can't speak to the last administration who put together the RFP, the members that were on it. I know 3 members from Girdwood were on that RFP proposal, which one it was granted. Connie won it 9-0. I don't know the public process associated with that. I'm very, very confident that it met all the requirements lined out in code. I would like to add a couple things. I know, for example, Girdwood Community Land Trust. I know they're very interested in that parcel as well. The challenge that we run into, and of course it's not making excuses at all, but the very real challenge we run into is our purchasing requirements. So if I went to hypothetically speaking, if I went to the Girdwood community and I said, tell me what you want to have in this RFP, by code, we would then limit anybody in the Girdwood community from being involved in the RFP who is involved in developing the RFP, because they would have a competitive advantage. So putting together RFPs, you know, we run into this all the time. We run into it with the navigation center. We have to keep an arm's length distance. You know, we're no experts in navigation centers, so we have to talk to people who are good at it, but we can't talk to them too much because they may very well be involved in putting in on the RFP. So now they disqualify themselves as having competitive advantages. But again, I can't speak to every single process that took place in the previous administration with the RFP. A couple other things I would like to mention is that at our last at the June HLBAC, I said, you know, I don't know what's happened in the past, you know, how previous HLB directors or real estate directors or people in my position dealt with Girdwood. My understanding is that the relationship between HLB and the Girdwood itself has been very strained. You know, I made the statement, hey, if anybody's interested in any HLB parcels for any sort of development, you approach me and we'll make it happen. You know, Girdwood Community Land Trust approached me, interested in a parcel, projects that they want to do on that particular parcel. I'm sorry, I don't have that parcel number in front of me. I figured out within a week what's the fastest way to get it to them. 55-year lease, and we already had sort of a kind of a pre-development meeting with them earlier this week. So moving fast on that. And so again, I just want to emphasize that whatever happened in the past relationship with Girdwood and HLB, I think it would be helpful if people move past that and realize that we're going in a very different direction. And obviously those actions are very clear that we are moving in that direction. There was also a desire to do sort of a community garden. I understand that that's been a factor within Girdwood that you guys have wanted for quite a while. And I'm identifying parcels right now to do a lease for some community gardens, I believe in the GOS zoning district. So I just wanted to make you aware of those things as well.
Thank you. You'd think after 2.5 years I'd get used to this. Thank you, Mr. Tremblay, for those updates and for the new approach. Jennifer.
Thank you, Mike. With your approval, I was wondering if I could just back up 1 second and ask a question about the HLBAC work session, because I was in that meeting and I understood that almost all the commissioners asked for a work session, not that it was just a suggestion, but that it was an almost universal ask. According to my notes, I'd have to double check on the meeting minutes, but that's also my recollection. So I just wonder if I could get some clarification on that.
Sure. So I guess it depends on what you mean by work session. If we're going to sit down and have a presentation to the HLBAC on what's going on with Holton Hills, where we currently stand with the section line easements, where we stand with the track plat, where we are in our process with the subcommittee for the land use committee. Yes, all that is going to take place. It's a presentation from us. It'll be an opportunity to have that conversation with the HLBAC. I don't believe it's lined out in the agenda as saying work session Holton Hills. So was there something more specific that you were looking for in regards to a work session?
I'm not personally looking for anything. It's my understanding that the commissioners were looking for the opportunity to learn more about this and kind of ASAP. So perhaps the presentation is answering that need. I mean, I guess that's a discussion in between. I just wanted to raise the issue that I heard it being asked for specifically.
Yeah, so usually, and again, I kind of live in this world where there's work sessions and there's, terminology that, that triggers things in my mind is, we have assembly work sessions where, they'll ask me to come and sit down and talk about X, Y, or Z, and then they sit across the table and then they ask me questions, or they'll ask the fire chief to come in and they'll say, fire chief, what's going on at station 12? Why did blah, 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 blah happen? It really wasn't going to be that format. It was going to be us presenting, telling them, where we are, and then us leading that discussion. So maybe it's nuanced, but I didn't really view it as a work session as it would be with an assembly. But with what you just said, I think that it meets the intent of that work session of what you were hoping to look for.
Okay, thank you. Mike, with your permission, can I now ask a question about what we were most recently? Okay.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm sure it can be frustrating being held responsible for things that were developed within the last administration. And also there has been a fair amount of turnover with HLB. So that has meant that Girdwood is sometimes reacting to an institution rather than people, because the people keep switching. But I think sooner or later, they're going to want an answer to the public involvement question, or more precisely, why there was a complete lack of it. And I understand that it's not standard procedure. I understand and I appreciate what you're saying about your development agreement with Providence. However, that Providence agreement is not as transformative for the Anchorage environment as Holton Hills is for Girdwood. And sooner or later, Girdwood's really going to want answers, preferably sooner, about something that's adding 30%. Can you imagine doing that in Anchorage, 30%, and not asking any community councils or anything else about their input on what they're looking for within an RFP? Again, understand this RFP wasn't yours, but I think that the relationship between Girdwood and HLB is somewhat fraught for reasons that the more I look at it, the more I think are potentially institutional and not personal, not even necessarily political with this particular administration, but having to do more with a process that was is better suited to other land disposals, but there are some issues with this one. And
sure,
that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, and I'm sympathetic to that And I understand the challenge associated with it. You know, one of the things that I was able to track down was the Crow Creek Master Plan. The Crow Creek Master Plan was approved by the Land Use Committee, approved by GBOS, and it basically addresses development of that Holton Hills area, among others, and it called for about 1,500 homes to be built. And it identified certain locations. Now, from my understanding that the Crow Creek Plan, I mean, it was adopted by the Assembly, it went through all the public processes, and that was 1,500 homes. And it was broadly supported in the community. I mean, it got approval from GBOS. Now, the Crow Creek Master Plan, as far as I understand it, is no longer active because it called for the development to begin in 2020. And since it didn't, it kind of, I think, from my understanding, put the plan on hold. So, and I found that I was able to read the plan on Thursday. So this is kind of new information. I am interested to know what the community, because that was in 2006. So I'm curious if the community no longer supports that Crow Creek Master Plan that called for 1,500 homes. Ironically, mostly single family. It really didn't call for a tremendous amount of mixed use development, which is what Holton Hills is now. So anyways, so I am sympathetic to that, 30%. It is a lot. It's significantly less than what the Crow Creek Master Plan initially calls for, though. So, and again, we can have that discussion in that working group. And I'd like to know what the working group thinks about that.
I'll just respond very briefly to your comment, Mr. Tremblay. I think the 2006 Crow Creek Working Plan was very much in alignment with the 95 area plan for Girdwood, which foresaw a much larger community than either we have become or I feel that the community wants to be. So it was in a different environment with a very different trajectory, and we will find out when we complete our rewrite of the master plan, of the comprehensive plan for Girdwood, but I very much doubt that would be supported under the new plan. So I think the community has changed its views in the last couple of decades, but we will find out properly soon. Okay, can I just, there was one last thing which is mentioned at the end of the agenda here, and I know we spoke about this briefly last week, but we did put a formal request in for a kind of legal review or a review from legal to confirm that the process was followed for RFP and development agreement. And I believe that request actually ended up on your desk. Could you give us an update on where that is?
Sure. So I have not signed it.
Right.
Just legal. If it's something that's appropriate for GBOS to request.
Okay.
They will get me back a response when they give me a response.
Understood. Okay. Thank you. Was there anything else on the topic of HLB from anybody else? Any other supervisors or any other comments from admin? If not, we will move on to item 4, solid waste services. Jennifer?
Thank you, Mike. I think that this is well laid out in the agenda. We are looking for some answers and hopefully maybe some solutions for the change in the transfer station hours. And in particularly for losing 1 day's worth of service. It's a rather critical day since it's when many of our weekenders are on their way out of town, and it ties in with our issues around bears and a lack of bear-proof containers for trash.
Thank you. Is there anyone on the administration who can respond or provide any more information on this?
This is Amy, the Boston Municipal Manager. I didn't really hear a question in there, but I will tell you, I've had a brief conversation with the Solid Waste Services Director, and he said they haven't had discussions on lowering the hours or reducing the hours on a permanent basis. The only reason they would reduce the hours would be cut down on personnel and overtime at this point. I'm happy to get a more in-depth response from Solid Waste Services, but they were not available to attend this afternoon.
Okay, thank you. So the way we should interpret this is just a temporary reduction in hours.
That's what I've been told.
Okay, thank you. There was also a question which came up at the last meeting, I believe. In code, GBOS actually has given has been given one of the services of solid waste collection, although that also is area wide. There's kind of a conflict there. And I think the request was, is it actually something GBSA could potentially fund? Or is the code incorrect and needs to be corrected, in which case we should go through that process?
Was that a question for me, Mr. Edgington?
Well, it's a question for the administration, I suppose. Actually, within code, GBOS has power. Girdwood Valley Service Area has powers over police, fire, roads, drainage, recreation, parks and recreation, cemetery, and solid waste services, which is a little odd, given that it also appears to be an area-wide function.
I would be happy to look into it. I'm just briefly familiar with that section of code, but I haven't looked at it in many years, so I'd be happy to look into it. And if GBOS has recommendations, I'd be happy to have a collaborative session and kind of work through it.
Okay, that would be great. Yeah, I think probably a clarification about whether that's something that's incorrect in the code needs to be fixed, or whether it is actually a potential service area power, and then we can take it from there. Brianna.
Yes, thank you, Mike. I have a follow-up question for Dembowski or the staff to be more specific with the questions, perhaps. So we would like to know why the transfer station has reduced the hours, which you sort of answered, and then what is needed to return to Sunday operations. Thanks.
I'll take those questions back to the Solid Waste Services Director for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Actually, Brianna, do you want to just go straight ahead into the next item 5?
Yes, and this might sound familiar to some. We're circling back to about a year ago when this topic about code for enforcement related to defective trash cans supplied by Alaska Waste and the possible change in code of the secure trash regulation zone. So because we've had Assemblyman Middleton was leading this, and with Solid Waste Services, we're just not sure where this ended up. And I guess Bradley Larson is the contact now, and he is not able to be at this meeting today. But I guess that he can post tickets on the site if there's an actual location that an infraction has occurred. The can have a ticket on it. And then the situation we're dealing with in Girdwood, fortunately this year hasn't been as bad as the last 2 years, but if there are community dumpsters or apartments or condo units that are unlocked, more likely they will be used by other people and community members or poached, but we need a solution for the unsecure trash cans issued by Solid Waste Services.
I will add that to my list for directors of pay.
Okay, thank you. It's a combination, I think, of solid waste and code enforcement, whoever, which department that falls into. The issue is that under the solid waste, under the secure trash regulation zone, there is a requirement on any private waste collection company to provide secure cans, bear cans, effectively, bear resistant cans. And Alaska Waste provided cans which initially appeared to meet the specification, and then that appeared to meet the standards, and then that standard was withdrawn because the manufacturer made changes after certification, and the cans that were actually delivered no longer were bear resistant. So we ended up in a situation where Alaska Waste had invested in a large number of cans which did not meet bear resistant standards and have distributed around the community. So last year we had many problems of bears just getting straight into these cans, and the code kind of requires that the provider provide them, and the provider did due diligence, I believe, but what we ended up with was not a valid solution, or not an appropriate solution. So that caused some complexity, and I think there was an attempt to look at the code and see whether the code could be clarified to address these issues in the future. But as Brianna pointed out, it's not been so bad in terms of the bear activity this year. It's probably been elsewhere. Okay, was any other comments on this item? If not, we will move on to the last one, item 6, which I believe Kyle can probably lead.
Yeah, and so the last item relates to the capital request through the ARPA from the Assembly, and I did not get a chance to listen to the meeting on Friday, but it sounded like the Assembly had a review of all the projects that they're considering under that ARPA funding, and 3 of them from Girdwood were the Little Bears Playhouse replacement funding, the Ruan Road, here it says Ruan Bridge funding, but it would be Fish Culvert funding, and then Imagine Girdwood, which is the Girdwood area funding. So I don't have an update, so I don't know where the Assembly got, but it sounds like they have another work session this week to probably put the final pencil to these projects and hopefully move forward for approval in early August. But I don't know if anybody knew anything about updates on Girdwood projects.
No, as much as you did.
Yeah.
Their work session is Wednesday.
Okay.
So, and I think you're correct, is that they intend on finalizing at that time the numbers, I think, for the projects.
Okay. Yeah.
I would say based on, sorry.
Please, Mike, go ahead.
Please go ahead, Bryce.
So preliminarily, through Murkowski's office, has already been awarded about 1.6 million for the, or preliminarily awarded 1.6 million for the failing culvert in Girdwood. So our office put in a request. Murkowski's office is one of our top requests, actually, for the Girdwood community in order to replace that culvert. Because we requested 2 million and received 1.6 and small. We'll have to, lose and have to pick up the match on that. So the funding's already been, will not be received until next year, but it's already been requested, preliminarily awarded.
Thank you, Bryce. I didn't catch at the beginning. Which does that come from a particular project, or is that just a direct appropriation?
So direct appropriation through Murkowski's appropriation.
Thank you. That's great news. Because that was the one of the 3 which was least likely to come from ARPA funding.
Yeah, and so with that said, we're happy to say that's preliminary again. So while it's on this, barring any potential issues where it would or would not be able to receive funding based off of federal regulation.
Understood. Thank you.
Oh, pardon me. Just saying we should have full answer on that. Hopefully by the end of the year, which I know is not ideal, but that's how the federal government works.
Understood. Thank you very much. Okay. Any other questions from the board or admin on any of these topics? If not, we will move to public comment. Persons offering public comment must state full name and address. Public comments limited to 3 minutes per person. Must be on subjects not listed on the agenda. Does anyone have a public comment? Not seeing anyone. Okay, so we can move to adjournment. We'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Brianna. Do this by assent. Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much for your time.
Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
That was fun.
It's great to see you guys in person.